Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And I see a comment from Fox for Witch, um, and asking about signing up for pagan.world. I will get you an answer to that, Fox for which I don't have it off the top of my head because I'm not in charge of that particular aspect. I can certainly check on it for you and have I'll send you an answer after the program. I don't know that that there is necessarily an email you should be expecting, but we'll find out. Um, Today is our weekly roundup of news, and unfortunately, a lot of weeks that ends up being talking about politics and Christian nationalism. And hello to Gwenny in the chat room, and Fox for which says thank you, and I will certainly check on that for you. I love it when our weekly roundup of news can be about happy, cheerful subjects. I love it when it can be more about our own community. And we do have one story from that this week, but we have two very real world stories that I want to talk about this week. Both of them are Supreme Court judgments that have come down and have direct relevance on ultimately our community, but us as people. And hello to Mary Hawk in the chat room. Hello to Renee in the chat room. The first one has to do with presidential immunity. And the Supreme Court this week ruled on the issue of presidential immunity and came down with the decision that presidents have immunity for all official acts, but not for private ones. And I'm not really sure what to say about that because that was my understanding in the first place. I don't find that surprising. But apparently there's some level where that is a change because a lot of people are treating it as one. There's a feeling that this gives a it moves the president above the law while they're in office, and that is a potentially very dangerous thing, regardless of who's president. Um, Hello to Janet in the chat room. I think that there is a good reason to have immunity from official acts in many cases, but I don't know that that it's good to have total immunity. And you look back at any of the last 50 years of presidents, maybe the last 100 years of presidents, maybe all 248 years of presidents, and I'm hard pressed to think of any of them who didn't do anything that was objectionable somewhere to someone that could have led to a prosecution under different circumstances. And I can see how not having that immunity is crippling to a presidency. On the other hand, total immunity does seem rather frightening. The fact that it does not extend beyond official acts is in many ways a saving grace, except I don't believe it exactly defines what is an official act, and it raises the question of where that line is drawn and at what point a president could be held legally responsible um, for some atrocious act. And I don't have an answer for that. Well, I do. Um, this is making that largely impossible, regardless of who the president is. And it's not really good, regardless of who or what is in power. Um, And yet at the same time, there are parts of it that are. It's a very complex situation. I don't know that I exactly disagree with the ruling, but I certainly have concern about what could come from it. And I recommend you go and research it for yourself. That is our first story, and I felt like I would be remiss if I didn't remark upon it. But like I say, my understanding has always been that presidents had immunity from official acts. Hello to Zane in the chat room. But I guess there's been a gray area, so that in certain situations, presidents did have to stop and think, is this really worth taking a chance? And I don't know that that's bad, but they don't need to think about that now. People have, of course, immediately outlined the worst possible scenarios, like having political opponents assassinated. I'm not sure if that could be considered an official act, but if a president does have a political opponent assassinated, who's going to stand up and say they couldn't? Because they'll know they can be assassinated. That is the kind of problem that comes from this kind of act. And you have to think about all of the possible results of situations. In the many years that I have been part of the first priesthood of the Karelian tradition and the roughly 20 years that I served as chancellor of the Karelian tradition, I issued a lot of decisions that we might describe as judicial. And in doing that, I was always extraordinarily careful about what I was doing and about making sure I explained my reasoning and that it was as flawless as I could make it. Because I was always constantly aware that, there can always be legal consequences. There never were. Many situations that could have legal consequences don't. But it's something you have to be aware of. I was always aware, for example, that you cannot just accuse someone of something with nothing to put behind it. You give them a ready case of libel, which, if you have nothing, that doesn't matter because, we just have to look at Alex Jones to see how toothless libel laws actually can be. But still, it's a mess you don't want to deal with. If someone makes an accusation against someone and you cannot prove it, you're very foolish to simply repeat that accusation. People will do that. I see people making unfounded and unbacked accusations every day. I've even been on the receiving end of them. But I myself was always careful not to do such things because I knew there were potential legal consequences. Seeing, oh, and hello to Ed the Pagan in the chat room who says, Fox for Witch, DM me and we will work everything out. So Fox for Witch, if you will send a direct message to Ed Hubbard through Facebook, everything will be taken care of immediately. Hello to Reverend Michael in the chat room. For presidents, I believe they've had this same concern. Yes, there was immunity, but where exactly did the limit lie? And I think that may have held some people back from doing certain things. We'll see what it means for the future now that it's more bluntly spelled out. I certainly hope that nobody's doomsday scenarios are what we actually see. But you gotta wonder, and you never know where things can lead. And um, and Ed points out that President Nixon was in a situation like this with Watergate. And it's debatable whether this would have been a defense for him, but he chose not to test the system when his actions were revealed, um, presumably because he didn't think it would work out in his favor. Um, Would something like Watergate, which is to say, bugging your political opposition, be considered an official act? I could see how it could be portrayed that way. Um, and that should be frightening to people. But but it's only one of our stories for this week. Our next story, also from the Supreme Court, is the Chevron decision, which actually is far more consequential to everyday life. One of the things that I'm seeing people talk about is how people's attention is going in the wrong directions. One of the things I'm seeing people posting about a lot is that people should be more concerned about Project 2025 than they are about the recent presidential debate, for example. Um, I would say people should be far less uh, concerned with the presidential election than with the entirety of the election. Simply, regardless of who wins the presidency, who dominates Congress is actually going to be more important. That's where the real battle is, and nobody's looking there. The court system was far more important than either of these things, and that battle's already lost. The court system has been um, wildly swayed into Christian dominionist territory through the acts mostly of Mitch McConnell. And we're seeing that through some of these decisions. The Chevron decision is um, a key example of that. If you don't know the Chevron decision, um, it was overturning the so-called Chevron deference. And this was established um, many years ago in 1984, when I would have been 21 years old. And it was a rule that when looking at cases against federal agencies, um, and on within the federal agencies, how they make their decisions, deference should be given to experts in the field. If Congress did not specify how a law was to be enacted, say, for example, an anti-pollution law, the agency was to give deference to the experts in the field, and the courts were to do the same. That they needed to listen to expert testimony, not make it up on their personal opinion. That has now been set aside with the point of view, theoretically, that Congress must spell out exactly how every legislation regarding a federal agency is to be employed. And if not, it's up to not the experts in the field or the experts in the agency, but the individual judge to decide how the policy is to be implemented, how the law is to be implemented. And this affects a wide range of our lives. Everything from pollution, whether we're talking about water pollution, air pollution, other pollution, food regulations, safety regulations, every regulation. Um, and hello to Jason in the chat room. Jason says, I heard about the Chevron ruling being appealed. That made me cry. Well, yeah, it's at that level. And hello to Lolan, who says hello from New York City. It's good to see you. This is very serious, because one of the things that has been possible, and hello to Lavola in the chat room, it has been possible through through federal legislation and the federal agencies to address across the nation many important issues that affect all of us, especially regarding safety and pollution and the like. And a great deal of that has just been swept aside. And if the law is even remotely vague, um, it is now in great danger of being basically um, unenforceable. And hello to Steve in the chat room. And of course, it's not possible for Congress to control these tiny issues, or even in many cases, the larger issues of these kinds of safety regulations that federal agencies were put in place to deal with. It takes a huge amount of time that they don't have, even if they wanted to do it. And to be honest, a lot of Congress is composed of self-important weasels who are there to make as much money as they can, to get as much glory as they can, and to hide behind vague legislations that they can then represent in different ways to different constituents. They've deliberately kept many of their legislations vague on controversial subjects, which is why this is so important, because they knew that the agencies would be able to set the policies. That's no longer true. And hello to Steve in the chat room, if I didn't say hello already. Now, if Congress hasn't already done it, it falls not to the agency, not to the experts in the field, but directly to the judge, who could be anyone. And if we haven't noticed, we have a lot of fairly idiotic judges, regardless of what political aspect you come from. You know, I remember a time when there was a lot of effort put forward to portray the judicial system as very level-headed and mature. I remember Judge Wapner from the People's Court, who was a wonderful example of what a judge should be. He was reasoned in his thinking. He did not, for the most part, express his personal opinions about situations, at least not in wildly overstated ideas. Today we've got television judges who basically act like gossiping neighbors, and are constantly giving their personal opinions. But the problem is this is imitated in real life. And our court systems are not in a good place. And it's arguable if they ever were. If we look back through history, there were actually always lots of bad judges. But at one time, a lot of them at least made an effort to look good. And certainly there have also been a large number of judges who were good, but that number surely seems to be shrinking. And, you know, as people, as citizens, we need to be aware of this. The Chevron decision moves, I think, a disproportionate amount of power to the court system. A lot of things are doing that. When we look at the issue of ethics for the Supreme Court, for example, they're trying to give the impression that they have a certain amount of control over the executive branch and a certain amount of control over the legislative branch, but no one has any control over their ethics, which they have absolutely no actual rules on, just some suggestions that they clearly are not following. This is bad. This is not good. When you're dealing with judges who are actually following those suggestions, that's fine. But that doesn't seem to be where we're at. What does all of this have to do with anything? Repeatedly now, I've said, in a lot of ways, we've already lost the war that we're in, or at least the battle. Our question now is, how do we move forward? The truth is, when we talk about things like Project 2025, we've already lost that battle no matter where this election goes, no matter where the presidential election goes, and no matter where the congressional election goes, unless there's a full-on miracle. And that's because the court system is what will actually enforce it, and they're already in the Christian Dominionist camp. We were largely not even there for the battle. And yes, it is true that if certain things were to happen in Congress, that could maybe be changed, but it will take a lot of effort and a lot of will. It is a serious situation. Now, having said that, does that mean that doom is imminent? No, I don't think it does. I think that a lot of losses are imminent. And I think those losses are more for communities that are important within the pagan community and for rights that are important to the pagan community than for example, our right to be pagan. I don't really think anyone is planning to come after that, at least not quickly. But they are planning to come for the LGBT community, at least largely. They're planning to come after marriage rights. They're planning to come after education. They definitely want Christian indoctrination for the nation's school children. All of this is part of that Project 2025. All of this is harmful to our community. But are they going to come directly after, for example, the pagan churches? I don't think so, because that precedent could harm their own. But are they going to hurt our communities through all these other things around us? Yes, they are. May they come after our churches? Well, yes, they might. They've tried that before. But we have been fortunate in having allies, even among conservative Christians, because the precedent could also affect small Christian churches. So at least at that level, I think we're not in immediate danger, but many of us as individuals are. And the idea that people are going to be shipped off to camps, I don't think is anything that most of us need to be worried about. But your marriage rights, you may need to be worried about. Your divorce rights, you need to be worried about. Your ability to get contraception, you need to be worried about, because eliminating easy access to contraception is part of the 2025 project. These are all things we might not immediately think of. And, are they pagan issues? Well, they're issues that affect us. And Lolan says, are you prepping for bad times or celebrating now like it's 1999? We need to be prepping for bad times. Now, and Edward adds to that your right to run for office. And in some ways there may be that. There's also the difference between your legal right and what you can actually do. That's more a threat to us, I think. And we need to be looking at our strategies for how to deal with the implementation of Project 25, because it's going to be implemented regardless of this election. Now, can it be as completely implemented regardless of who wins the election? No. Can it be headed off in some ways? Yes, in some ways. But again, it's the court system that's going to implement it. It's not Congress. It's not the executive branch. And that field is already largely lost. So we need to be looking at how do we deal with that? Now, there are ways. The biggest way is through the legislative branch. But who's talking about the legislative election that's coming? Nobody. Everyone's talking about the president. That's important, but it's less important, really, than who controls Congress. That is what's really going to shape the next 4 years. Regardless of who wins the presidential election, they could end up being largely powerless if Congress opposes the things they want to do. So we really should be looking at our local congressional candidates. But are we? Not that I'm seeing anywhere. We should change that. Is anyone going to change that because they watched this broadcast? Probably not. Not enough people will see it. Does the media want to alert us to this danger and get us to address that? No, they want controversy and division. That's what builds their money. Now, Jason says, is the presidential election a red herring? In some ways, I will tell you that it is. Not entirely. I feel that there are big differences in this and every election between the candidates. But the president is not the king. And Congress wields a great deal of the actual power. The court system wields a great deal of the actual power. The current constitution of the court system is the biggest danger to our future, in my opinion. The constitution of our Congress next year is one of our greatest potential dangers, in my opinion, bigger than who is the president next year. So if you value my opinion, yes, of course, be concerned for the presidential election. And I'm not telling you who you should support. I'm just saying be concerned. But be more concerned with Congress. Be working for those congressional candidates who represent your point of view, because that is where the most effective action at this time can be taken, especially since the Chevron decision, which has undercut a lot of the power of the presidency. So this week, on one hand, the Supreme Court handed the presidency a great win with that immunity decision, and a great loss with the Chevron decision, because that will shackle in some ways the power of whoever wins. And Ed points out the president is really the front of the movement. Who wins will make a difference, but is not an end to the crisis. And this is exactly so. And I tried to point this out a little over a year ago when talking about the Corellian First Priesthood. The First Priesthood are the face of the tradition. They inspire the tradition. They lead the tradition. They don't rule it. They can't command it. They can only lead. Because in the end, everyone can do what they want. They can walk away if they want. The president is not quite like that, because there are certain things the president certainly can do. But they can't act unilaterally. And nothing in these decisions, in and of itself, gives them that ability. The choice of those Congress people, the choice of those judges could give a particular candidate that ability, but the law does not. And again, those state elections are far more important to the future than the federal one. Who goes to Congress for your state? And who is leading your state? Those are the things that are going to be most important. And I've talked before about how we're moving quickly into a feudal situation. One of the reasons I'm back in Illinois is that I expect that the feudal state of Illinois is going to continue to protect a lot of the rights that I value, regardless of what happens in the states around it. There are things that could interfere with that, but I don't know that they're going to. But I think a lot of people are going to lose a lot of rights in some of these other states, and a lot of protections that have just been given a big boost toward being lost. And where could that be changed? Where could this Chevron ruling be changed? It could be changed in Congress. Congress could simply write a law saying that this is how these policies are to be set by federal agencies. But they can only do that if the right people are there. Right now, I'm not sure that our Congress can write any law because they are so split. Um, and that, of course, does give much greater power to the other branches of our government. So, once again, our weekly roundup has been entirely political, not partisan, but political. And we need to be mindful of this. And what do we do? What can we as a pagan community do to prepare for dealing with Project 2025 and other things that we are most likely facing? Well, one thing we can do is come together and work together on making our own policies, our own plans. And one way to do that is through the Pagan World Congress, which is set for not this October, but next October, when these things will all be far clearer in terms of where they're going. And I would encourage you to become involved in that. And you can sign up at pagan.world and arrange to be a voting member in that Congress, arrange to be able to take part in those conversations. I don't see anyone else putting together a place for these conversations among ordinary pagans. So I encourage you to go do that. With that, we've come to the end of our half hour. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back on Monday. And I hope that you have a wonderful weekend. I hope you had a wonderful Independence Day yesterday if you're in the United States. And wherever you are in the world, I hope, um, other than the United Kingdom, I hope you had a wonderful independence from Great Britain Day because that seems to be everywhere. Of course, if you're in the UK, I hope you had a wonderful Thursday. And with that, let us close with our prayer as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to help us to keep our eyes open toward the future, to keep our minds open to what we can do to have the most positive effect on the situations in front of us. Help us to protect ourselves, our rights, our liberties as a community and as individuals as we go forward. Help us not to be drawn back into the dark ages, but to continue forward into the future we hope to see. We know that all things that happen for a reason, but let us have the best reasons, and let us use our own actions to bring them to fruition. Because without our actions, obviously, they will not come to fruition. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you. We look forward to your guidance and your effect in our lives. And knowing you're always with us, from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now